When the elves first awakened in Middle-earth, they were found by Arome, the Vala, who would lead them on a long and arduous journey to the Undying Lands. This crossing was no easy feat, and even the elves would find it difficult to endure. And so, Yavanna, the Vala, prepared a remarkable way bread for the elves called Lembas, so that they could use this food to sustain themselves throughout this tough journey. This bread was made out of a special type of corn that was grown in the fields of Aman, and it somehow managed to capture the strong life of those lands. This strength could then be passed on to whoever ate this bread, and it seems that the Vala would eventually teach the elves how to grow these crops and how to bake lembas. Some of these seeds would eventually make their way to Middle-earth, and it's interesting to wonder how they got there. We think it's most likely that Melian, the Maia, had brought some of these seeds with her, since she was, after all, a servant of Yavanna, and she would have certainly known and appreciated the secrets of Lembas. This theory is also encouraged by how Galadriel was once a student of Melian, and it's quite possible that she learned this art from her, or that she acquired some seeds from her teacher. Both Melian and Galadriel were known for their Lembas bread, and almost all of the Lembas that we see in the books comes from their realms, which strikes us as an interesting coincidence. Of course, we can't exclude the chance that some of the elves might have brought some of these seeds with them to Middle-earth, and there's even a possibility that both of these origins are correct. It's impossible to say, though we'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Now, this corn was extremely tough, and it grew swiftly in any season and climate apart from frost. And there was something within it that prevented worms and insects from trying to eat it, or even touch it, and it was immune to all rot, mold, and evil. Even though it was very resilient, there were a few things that could stunt its growth. For we're told that this corn wasn't able to thrive in the shadows of other plants, and it couldn't endure the strong winds that came out of the north while Morgoth lived there. The elves would typically grow this corn in sunlit glades, even though this remarkable crop needed very little sunlight, and the elves would guard these lands closely. They would harvest this crop by hand, without using any blades or metal instruments, and none of the elves could touch the grain apart from a select few elven women. These were called the Yavanildi, or Ivonwin in Sindar, which meant the Maidens of Yavanna. And out of all the elven society, they were the only people that knew the secrets behind the art of lembas making. The ancient elven law dictated that only women could form part of this group, and we imagine that this was probably due to some tradition related to Yavanna. It's also quite interesting to note that in elven society it usually fell upon men to prepare and cook food, and so the art of lembas making is one of the few exceptions that we know of. The elves wouldn't let any part of this crop go to waste, for after they harvested its grain, they would pull out its white stalk from the earth, and they would use it to weave baskets to store and carry the grain. Now, as we mentioned earlier, only the Maidens of Yavanna could prepare the lembas bread, and once it was ready, it was given to the elven queen, or to the highest authority among the elven women if no queen was present. She was called the Masani, which means the lady, or the bread giver, and it was her responsibility to keep the lembas bread, and to decide how and to whom they were given. Now, the lembas bread was light brown on the outside, while its inside was the colour of cream, and the elves would wrap it in malorn leaves, which helped to preserve its sweetness for many weeks. Speaking of its sweetness, lembas was said to have an incredible taste, and according to Gimli, it even tasted better than the famous cakes of the Beornings, and those were some of the greatest bakers in Middle-earth. Even so, lembas wasn't meant to be a pleasure food. For its most important characteristic was that the moment it was eaten, it immediately reinvigorated a person's body and spirit, and this made it an ideal ration for running or travelling across great distances. It was more nutritious and strengthening than any other food that was made by men, and even a single lembas bread was enough to keep a traveller going through a heavy and long day of labour. According to Sam, without the lembas bread, their spirit would have been broken much earlier in their quest, for it helped to boost morale, and it also had a special property that could make the difference between survival and death. For the more a traveller ate and relied on this bread, the more potent and stronger its effects became. And these were increased further when the traveller didn't mix it with other food. It would end up feeding their will and spirit, and it gave them enough strength to endure their task, and to master their body beyond anything that was normally possible. It appears that it even had some healing properties, for we are told that the elves would sometimes give it to those who were injured and whose life was in danger, though it's impossible to say whether it had some magical healing ability or if it was simply very useful because it was highly nutritious, which could be vital in the healing process. It's clear that from these effects, lembas was the perfect food to be eaten at the end of one's journey or quest, when things began to look incredibly dire, such as a mixture of fatigue and a lack of other food sources. Its only downside was that even though it contained an incredible amount of sustenance, it wasn't very filling to eat, since it was quite a small size, and we see how both Merry and Sam would eventually crave something different. Even a simple loaf of plain bread. Now, normally the elves would only give this food to travellers who were going on long journeys in the wild, or those who were injured, and they would rarely share them with the race of men. Only a few men whom they loved or those who were in great need would ever taste lembas bread, such as Turin and Tuor. And we're actually told that Turin was the first man to ever taste it, and that this gift was the greatest favour that Melian had ever shown to this mortal. It might seem cruel and a bit out of character for the elves to not share lembas bread with men, since it would have surely helped their allies. And it's important to know that they didn't do this out of some sort of greed or jealousy, for the Valar had, in fact, commanded the elves to keep this gift to themselves, and to avoid sharing it with men. For if mortals had to eat this bread often, they would slowly become tired of their mortality, and they would yearn to live amongst the elves in the fields of Aman, which was something that they could never have. It's very possible that this side effect was related to the corn's origin, for after all, we know that this crop came from Aman itself, and even though it was grown in Middle-earth, it could have kept some of the sort of essence of the undying lands within it, which could make mortals desire it. This might also explain another interesting property of lembas bread, for it seems that evil creatures could not eat it. And when Gollum tried to do so, he ended up coughing and choking, while exclaiming that it tasted of dust and ashes. The orcs detested its look and smell, and they would trample it into pieces rather than touch or eat it. And so perhaps there was some form of Aman's holy nature within this crop that made it unbearable to evil beings. Just to be clear, this is speculation on our part, but it does seem to fit together quite nicely. It's also worth mentioning that the race of men had their own form of waybread for travelling, and we see how during Isildur's time, the Dunedain used to carry some wafers on their person that could sustain life for many days. It wasn't as great as lembas, but it was still quite potent, for the art behind its creation came from Númenor. The men of Dale and Lake Town also had a form of waybread called cram, which was flavourless and quite unappealing to eat, though it was still very nutritious for long journeys. On a final note, we'd like to quickly point out that the word lembas was the Sindarin name for waybread, which meant journey bread, and it was also called koimas in Quenya, which meant life bread. So this wraps up today's episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Who do you think brought this crop to Middle-earth, and how do you feel about its powers? Did it have any special healing properties, or do you believe that most of its characteristics were due to its hallowed origin? As always, we'd like to give a quick shout out to all the patrons that choose to support this channel. Your help makes this channel possible, and your support is deeply appreciated. Particularly the Valar tier patrons, Jacob Williams, Michael Angel, and T. Gorman, and the Wizard tier patrons, James Stodgel, Andrew Burma, Mike Feeney, Roland Meervold, and Tamar Baines. If you too would like to help and support this channel while unlocking some cool perks, we'll be leaving a link to the Patreon page in the video description. You could also support this channel by checking out our store and by following us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and joining our Discord server. All of these links can be found in the video description. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. Until next time, when we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.